Hey guys, today we're going to be talking about Photoshop elements by request. This is something you guys asked me for, and we're going to be creating this image together, step by step. Now, a lot of tutorials on Photoshop elements that I have found really focus on like a specific tool. They show you how to use a specific tool, but I'm kind of a creative learner, and I feel like I learn best and retain information best when I'm working on a fun project like this one. Does that sound good to you guys? Let me know in the comments if you prefer this learning style as well, or if you'd like to see something else. Now, I'm working on the most recent version of Photoshop Elements, but most of the features we're going to be using today can be found on older versions of Photoshop Elements as well. And the source file, this image here, can be found on Pixabay, and I will link to it in the description box so you guys can do this tutorial with me step by step. The features in Photoshop Elements that we're going to be utilizing to complete this project today include cutting out elements out of a photograph. We're going to be working with styles like strokes and bevels and drop shadows. We're going to be working with gradients. We're going to be working with filters, and we're going to be, most importantly, working with clipping masks. So if that sounds good to you, let's just dive right into it. Okay, here we are in Photoshop Elements. Now I'm going to be working in the Expert field here. So make sure you're selected on Expert here at the top center of your screen for this project. Let's just do a really quick tour here. Over here on the left are all the different tools in Photoshop Elements. We're going to be digging into a lot of these. And if you select on one of these tools, and you're selected here on the tool options menu at the bottom, you can see that with every different tool, there's different fields and adjustments you can make with that particular tool. Now this menu here at the bottom right changes what we see in our inspector over here on the right. So the default is layers. We haven't created any layers yet, but we're going to be working a lot in layers today. There are effects, filters, some of this we're going to be diving into today as well, styles, which we will be diving into, and graphics, which are kind of like clip art assets that come with Photoshop Elements, and we are going to be using those today as well. So the first thing we need to do is bring in our image. We can do that by just dragging it and dropping it into Photoshop Elements. Now by starting the project this way, our finished project will have the same dimensions as this photograph. So the first thing we want to do is cut out this gentleman off the background. Now there's a few different ways you can do it. Let's head on over to the top of our tool menu under Select. We want to grab this icon here in the lower right corner. Depending on what you last use in Photoshop Elements, you might see this icon, or let's say this icon here in this bottom right quadrant of the Select menu. But no matter which you click, it's okay because we can access any of these tools down here. I'm going to select this one here, which is the Quick Selection tool. And what we can do is just bring our crosshairs over onto our photograph and then drag with our mouse, and it knows to cut out this gentleman from the background. I'm going to hit Command D to unselect that selection I just made. If you're in a newer version of Photoshop Elements, you can actually use this button here, Select Subject, and it will automatically detect the subject of your photograph and select it, and you can see that it has done that. I've got the microphone here, I've got his guitar, and I've got his head and body, so that's perfect. The next thing I'm going to do is head on over to this Refine Edge button. Now the background has disappeared and I can see exactly what has been cut out of this photograph. And I'm noticing a couple things here that I want to fix. First of all, if I look down here at the bottom of his guitar, you can see that it's clipped out part of the face of his guitar, and I want to restore that. So what I'm going to do is be selected on this icon here for edge detection. I'm going to bring up the radius here, and I'm just going to hold down my mouse key and kind of color that back in, and it restores that missing part of the guitar. And you can also see that I'm missing the microphone cord as well. So I'm going to color in where I think that cord edge is. Now we get this faint line of the cord. I'm going to pump up the Shift Edge slider. And now look, we've got that cord here. Now I'm going to switch to the Erase Refinements tool here. I'm going to zoom in on the picture by hitting Command plus so I can really see what I'm doing. And just very carefully clean up those edges. And there we go. Now, the next thing I want to do before I close out of this pop-up is change the output to new layer with layer mask. And then we're going to hit OK. Now I'm going to click the layers tab in the bottom right of the screen to show our layers so I can show you what we've got. And so what you can see here is that we've got a background layer here that is turned off. This is our original photo. If I turn it on, you can see it's our original photo. And then the next layer shows that same photo, but with a mask. All right, the next thing we want to do is add a gradiated background behind this musician. So to do that, we're going to head up to the top right of the screen and select this icon here for a new layer. And we're going to head on over to our tools menu and look at the one here that says draw and select this icon for our gradient tool. Now, if we look down at the bottom at our tool options, you can see what the gradient is going to look like as I have my settings right now. And where this yellow to maroon gradient is coming from is from these two swatches right here, these color swatches. So if I want to change the look of my gradient to something else, I just click on, let's say, the yellow swatch here, and then I can make that first color swatch any color I want, and I'm going to make it kind of a midnight navy blue, and just hit the OK button, and now look, that color swatch has changed. And this down here shows us what our gradient is going to look like. And that is the color combination I do want. So now to apply a gradient into our canvas here, just click anywhere in our canvas, hold down the mouse, and then drag. So let me show you here. I'm going to start at the top of my frame, and I'm going to go pretty straight down. And that is the gradient that I want. I want it to look exactly like that. However, if I wanted the maroon pinkish color to be at the top, I would actually start with my crosshairs at the bottom and go upward. And now look, I've got the opposite. If I wanted them to go at a diagonal, I could do that as well. But I'm just going to keep hitting undo until I get the gradient I actually wanted, which is this first try we did here. Now, obviously, the problem we're having is that our gradient is on top of our musician. We can't see our musician anymore. So this is where the layers window is so handy. You can actually reorder the layers so that we can put the musician on top. So remember, in the layers window in Photoshop Elements and like any other editing platform, it always looks down. So whatever's on the top layer is going to be laid over everything else. So to move the musician up top, I'm just going to click on the line of the musician, hold down my mouse key, and drag it up. And there we go. Now let's kind of spice this up with some interesting graphical elements. So we're going to head on over to the bottom right of the screen where it says graphics. And we're going to scroll down and look for these interesting like paint splatters. I'm going to grab this one here and drop it over here. I'm going to grab this guy here and drop it maybe up here. And I'm going to grab this cluster of stars and drop it, let's say, about here. Now, you might be having a hard time seeing these because they are this color here in our color swatches. That's this dark blue. And we can easily change the color of those by selecting the color swatch, choosing the color we want to use, hit OK. And now we know we're working with the purple here. And then we're going to click on over to layers again. We're going to make sure we're selected on that shape that we want to transform the color of. We're going to go back over to the draw tools here on the left side of the screen. I'm going to select this paint bucket, and then I'm just going to click on that shape to change the color. Now let's work on this paint splatter here. I'm going to make this a different color. I'm going to select that purple swatch here under color. Let's make it more of like a hot pink. And again, make sure we're selected on the paint bucket and then just click it. Now for this last one, shape 3, which is this cluster of stars, I actually want to give these stars a gradient effect. So let me show you how we do that. We're going to create a new layer by selecting the new layer icon here at the top of our layers window. We're going to head on over to gradient, and I'm going to change the color of both of these color swatches. We're going to go like a teal, so that one is good. Then to switch to the other color, I just hit these two little arrows here to swap. Grab this maroon. I'm going to change it to kind of a bright purple. And then I'm going to take these crosshairs in my canvas and drag and create a gradient here. So what we need to do is make sure that the shape that we want to use for our clipping mask is right underneath our layers. I'm going to right click and I'm going to select this, create clipping mask. Now we've got our stars shape filled with a gradient, and if I want to reposition the gradient. I'm going to head on over to my tools. Under select, use the move tool, this one here in the top left. And I'm going to move the gradient and reposition it within my stars. So you can see now I've got more purple on the stars. If I go this way, I get more blue. And then do you see these handles? This kind of bounding box? This is the size of our layer. If I want to make the gradient kind of more dramatic, I can just compress the shape of this so we get a bit of a sharper edge to our gradient. Okay, now again, I want all of these accent graphics to be behind our musician. So again, I'm going to look to my layers tab. I'm going to grab that layer with the musician and drag it all the way to the top of my layers so that all those graphics are behind him. All right, the next thing we want to do is add a clipping mask to our musician. So we're not going to see his whole head and body as we see it now. We're actually going to cut out a shape around him as well. All right, we're going to add another interesting paint splatter effect as well. So we're going to head on over to graphics again, and we're going to select this one here, crop shape 30. And I'm going to make it really large. And I can do that by grabbing the handles around it on the bounding box and scaling it way up. I'm going to zoom out on my canvas by hitting Command minus to make sure this is really big. And I want to make sure it's covering the musician. All right, I'm going to hit this green check mark to lock it into place. Head back over to layers. And we're going to fill this shape in with a gradient as well. So again, we're going to create a new layer. We're going to select the gradient tool. But this time, instead of using the gradient created with these two color swatches here, I'm actually going to use this drop down here in our tool options. And we're going to go from default to color harmonies 1. And I'm going to grab this guy here, this gradient here. These are like pre-designed gradients in Photoshop Elements, and this is the one I want to use. And so like always, I'm just going to drag my cursor in my canvas to create that gradient. And then again, I'm going to create a clipping mask by selecting that gradient in our layers, right-clicking and hitting Create Clipping Mask. And now we've got a mask in the shape of that paint splatter. And if I want to reposition where the colors are, so let's say if I wanted to see a little bit more blue here, I just grab this move tool and just move it. Hit the green check mark to set it. And again, we need to drag our musician to the top of our layers to get him above that shape. But we're going to do something else that's really interesting. I'm going to select that musician, the top of our layers, right click and hit Create Clipping Mask and watch what happens. Now he's cut out in the shape of that paint splatter. Now that we've got our basic layout here, I'm just going to do some fine tuning on these other paint splatters we've got going on. I just want them peeking out a little bit more from our shape here. All right, this looks good to me. Now we're gonna add some depth to this project by using bevels and drop shadows. So the first thing I wanna do, let's say select this paint splatter. I'm going to right click on it and select Edit Layer Style. And I get this pop-up window where I can make some changes to this paint splatter. In this case, I'm going to select Drop Shadow. And I'm going to play with these sliders on the distance and opacity and hit OK. And again on this one as well, right click, Edit Layer Style, Drop Shadow. Now on the ones that we filled with the gradient, it gets a little bit tricky. If I wanted to add a drop shadow, it's going to add a drop shadow to the entire gradient layer, which would be a square shape. That's not what we want. We want to add the drop shadow to the star's shape. So in order to do that, we have to do a workaround. Let's select that gradient that's filling up our stars. I'm going to right click and I'm going to release the clipping mask. I'm going to turn that layer off by hitting this eyeball here just to hide it. And now we can make changes to the stars here and add that drop shadow. So I'm going to select it here in my layers window, right click, Edit Layer Style, and now we can apply the drop shadow. You can see it there. I know it's a little dark on dark here. It's hard to see. And then we're going to turn back on our gradient, right click, and create the clipping mask again. And there you go. There are your gradiated stars with your drop shadow. Now for this big cutout we did, we're going to need to do the same thing. We're going to need to release the clipping mask on this gradient so we can do something different with that paint splatter. So I'm going to release clipping mask. I'm going to hide that gradient so we can really just focus on the shape. And then I'm going to right click, edit layer style. And this time we're going to do something different. We're going to add a bevel. So I'm going to check the bevel box here. And you can see what that does. It makes that shape almost look three-dimensional with very soft curved edges. Do you see that? With these highlights and shadows that it's created here. I'm going to hit OK. Then I'm going to turn back on that rainbow gradient, right click and create clipping mask. And now we've got a beveled edge. And then we're going to have to add the clipping mask again to this musician to get him cut out in that shape. Now I'd also like to add a drop shadow to the musician. So I'm going to right click on him, edit layer style, drop shadow. All right, now we're going to add a filter to this musician to kind of give him a more illustrated look. So it doesn't look so much like an actual photograph. It looks like a piece of art. We're going to select him in our layers. We're going to head over to filters on the bottom right of our screen. And we're going to look for this one called comic. Now, if you don't see that, hit this drop down and you'll see there's a lot of different filters in Photoshop Elements that you can apply. The one we're looking for is sketch. Double click on the comic effect to apply it to our photograph. And we can make a lot of adjustments here to how much this filter is affecting this photograph by working with these sliders. I'm just going to play with these sliders until I like the way it looks. Now, while I'm adjusting these sliders here, guys, if you feel like you're learning something, if you're enjoying this video, let me know by giving me a thumbs up, hitting that subscribe button, and ringing the notification bell. And there is the applied effect. And I'm going to zoom in so you can see he does look more like an illustration than a photograph. Looks great. Now we're going to add our text. So we just need to use the text tool over here on the left of the screen, this T icon. And now down here in our tool options menu, we get a lot of different options that we can use. The first thing I'm going to do is select my font. And I can scroll through all my fonts here in this drop-down window, or I can just type in the one I know I need. And the one I'm looking for is called Budmo Jiggler. And I'm still selected on the text tool, so now my cursor looks like this, and I just click anywhere in my canvas to add text. And now to size up this text, I just grab these little handles here. I'm going to grab the corner and expand that text, and I can reposition it. And I want to change the color of this text, so I'm going to select the text tool again, use the cursor in my canvas to just highlight all that text, and then head down to the tool menu. We've got this color swatch here, and I've got a menu of colors that are pre-selected for me by Photoshop Elements, but if I want a particular color, I just hit this color wheel icon here. And then if I want a color pick from somewhere else in my project, like this pink for instance, I just hover my cursor over that area in the project. You see I've got this eyedropper color picker icon right now. I'm going to select that pink and I'm going to hit OK. And now you can see it's pink. Now I want to add an outline to this text. So I'm going to make sure I'm selected on it, right click, hit edit layer style. This time we're going to look at stroke. I'm going to turn on the stroke by checking this box. And I'm just going to pump up the size of it. That looks good with this slider here. And I'm going to change the color by clicking on this black box. And I'm going to pick a really bright teal and I'm going to hit OK. And I actually want to rotate this text so it's at an angle. So make sure I'm selected on it. Hover my cursor over this center top square. Do you see that? I'm going to zoom in real tight on the screen, you guys, so you can make sure you see it. I'm going to click my mouse once and I'm going to get a different sort of bounding box here. And now again, I want to make sure that I'm hovering my cursor over that center square until I get this little double-ended arrow. And then I'm going to click down with my mouse, hold down, and swing to the left. And it's going to rotate my text. And I just want to do it just a hair. I'm going to hit the green check mark to set it. Let me go back over to layers here so you guys can see what happens every time we create text. It creates a new layer here in our layers menu. Now I want to add another line of text, so I'm going to head on over to the text tool again, get this text cursor in my canvas, click anywhere, add my new text. Now I want to change the font on this, so I'm going to highlight that text, head on down to the tool options menu. We're going to go to this drop down to change the font, or you can just type in the name of the font if you know what you're looking for. I'm going to hit this green check mark to set it, and I'm going to grab the handles to resize it. Now to make sure I constrain the proportions of that font, I want to grab one of the handles on the corners of my rectangle, not these side ones. Let me just show you really quick. If you do the side one, it's going to stretch it out, which maybe you want, but that's not what I want. And if I want to undo what I just did, I hit this cancel button instead of the green check mark. We'll try it again. So I'm on the corner here and I'm resizing that way. Perfect. I'm going to position it exactly where I want it. And I want to change the color of this font. So again, I'm going to grab the text tool in my menu, highlight, go down to color, and I'm going to pick a bright yellow. All right, we have done it. We've created that project. Now to save it, we just head on up to File and Save As. And you have a lot of different file formats that you can save this project as. You can save it as a Photoshop file, which will have a PSD extension, which means it's the project file. You can go back in and make revisions down the road. Or you can save it as a bitmap, a JPEG, a PNG, all of these different file types. Let's just save this one as a PNG. Make sure we have the PNG extension here, hit save, and there you go. So you guys, tell me, did you enjoy this tutorial in Photoshop Elements? Do you prefer learning this way where we create a project together and I use different tools and you learn how to use those different tools during the creative process? Or would you like something more technical that really just goes through every tool step by step and just tells you what it does? Let me know what you guys want to see in the comments. Thank you so much for creating with me today. I will see you again.